And welcome to the Special Call Policy Committee meeting. I want to introduce you first, if you haven't already met her, a truly outstanding person. Our attorney, Lauren Bush, is right here. She's a Siegel graduate. Please don't hold that against her. She is truly exceptional. If the policy committee, not the board of course, but if the policy committee, starting with Mr. Tollett down here, if you could just introduce yourselves so that she can put a name with a face, and I know she's probably met many of you already, but Mr. Tollett, if you would.
Yes, sir. My name is Bill Tollett. I'm the principal at Eagle School.
Kenneth Curley. I'm over the maintenance of Rutherford County Schools.
Claudia Belden, Community Rep.
I'm Jeff Reed, the board attorney.
Lauren Bush, staff attorney.
Joan Simmons, mathematics chairperson, Oakland High School. Kim Franklin, mathematics chair, Smyrna High School.
Kay Martin, secondary coordinator.
Regina Harvey, godmother of
Okay, as you see, we have a limited agenda tonight. I understand from Ms. Bush that some more policies are coming down the pike here pretty quick, and we'll be getting back together again not too long from now. But Ms. Bush, if you would, take it away.
Yes, thank you. So, policy review, TSBA recommends that we review policies annually. So for your review, if you will, Section 2 and Section 5 at your time, on your own time, if you'll review those two sections, and at our next policy meeting, if you have any suggestions for those policy, any potential revisions, if you will, let me know ahead of time. We can add that to the agenda. As far as policy changes before you tonight, the first is policy 1.704, and that is our charter school policy. Important to note that TSBA is preparing a new numeral system for this policy. There have been several state law changes as well as Board of Education changes. Those are in the works. However, their initial list of changes is reflected in 1.704. When we have additional changes to this policy, we will add those and change the numeral to go with that, just for your information. Specific parts of this policy to pay attention to tonight: the $2,500, the application fee has increased to $2,500. That is reflected on page 2 and should be highlighted. You have the original for your review as well. It's marked original at the top. There are also some grammatical changes as well. The second important change to this policy is on page 3, starting on line 9. That is the authorizer fee. That is going to be 3% of the annual per student state and local allocations, or $35,000, whichever is less. And that is the fee that is authorized by the Tennessee High Quality Charter Schools Act. A small change, and my apologies, it should state 2018-2019 school year, and that will be reflected in the new policy. As I stated, there will be some additions as well. The descriptor term of this has changed to charter school applications. This is the only policy that TSBA has changed as of yet. There will be more policy additions to this as the Tennessee Board of Education makes changes as per the state law requires. Are there any questions related to this policy?
I remember correctly, I believe it was originally $500, wasn't it?
Yes.
And was it not the Tennessee School Board Association that requested that be raised?
Yes, that was the Tennessee.
Because the 500 nowhere near covered what we were trying to do.
Yes.
Okay. Board, are there other questions?
Move for adoption of the new policy as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. A second from someone. Mr. Estes, thank you. Any further comment, giving a little bit more time tonight since we've more than doubled the number of people at this table. We're all in this together. Any other discussion, anything on this at all? Okay, if not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Ms. Bush?
Yes, policy 2.806. There is a revision to our bid and quotations policy. Public Chapter 415 does allow local education agencies with a centralized purchasing authority with an authorized full-time purchasing agent to increase the threshold required for competitive bids from $10,000 to $25,000. Our policy is amended to reflect this change. And this is just for the effectiveness and efficiency of that office.
I'll give you a minute or two to look over all of it. I think it's in the first two paragraphs on page 1.
Yes.
If you want to look at that for just a minute, are you going to get to the change on the second page?
Yes, there is one change. That is not really a change. It was just a formatting error on the page, so I had to scoot that down to the next. That's all that's reflected on that second page. So the only changes are reflected in that first paragraph. And Mr. Sandvik is here. He can answer any questions that you have specifically related to purchasing.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
The principal shall serve as purchasing agent in each school?
Yes, ma'am.
Seems to me, wouldn't that be better served with a central figure overseeing? I mean, that could be a lot of variance from school to school as far as bids and stuff like that. Why is that left to the principal, and don't they have more important educational things to do than getting bids and paying bills?
One of the things this addresses is we bid their state bids, their district bids, also that we do from time to time for equipment and things. One of the most frustrating things I used to run into as a principal, and often our bids were higher than what I could go to Walmart for or other places to buy. So one thing this allows, and that's really one of the reasons it's kind of going up, that they're going to buy typically the cheapest. But before, when it was such a low threshold, very often you had to go with the state bid or the other to do it. I don't think we've ever been written up by an auditor. Schools are fully audited and everything. I don't think, and we require with the 2,000, they do have to take quotes, right, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Have to take quotes and do it. So that's for the auditor to see, so they have to contact other vendors. I mean, if it is an item, you have a state bid and you might have other vendors, then you sit and list those and make that choice. But
Well, can you give me an example of something they would buy, so I would have a visual for that?
If I may ask, I think part of the issue here is each school, except our two alternative schools, has its own school activity fund. And that is the fund over which the principal acts as purchasing agent. So that is money coming into his or her school. So then those funds are also under this policy. So he or she would have to get quotes if this change is approved above $2,000. But if it crossed $25,000, then it would have to be advertised through the centralized purchasing department here. So this really, a lot of the purchases above that range will come off of our existing bids. But as Mr. Odom said, it gives some latitude. One of my frustrations, and one of the reasons I like this $25,000, there are vendors out there who will not commit to an advertised bid of, say, $20,000, who will give us that price, but if we have to go out for a bid and they have to advertise it and open it up to everyone, they won't do it. So but it's a different pot of money generally that the principals are buying for. One of the items we have to bid out at the old threshold was uniforms, which really frustrates principals because they will often need some additional uniforms, and if they go out for bid, the bid may not go to the same provider, so you have uniforms that don't exactly match. But these are out of school activity funds.
And each teacher receives how much a year this year?
$200 BEP money, and we have instructional allocations on a per student basis that go out to the schools.
In the second paragraph here, Jeff, with respect to 2,000, 5,000, is that coming from the state comptroller's office? Or is this
No, this has been our practice, and we have required 1,000 at the school level and 3,000 at the central office level for several years. We just want that documentation that multiple vendors are being checked. Yeah, but that has been our practice the whole time.
I'm a little uncomfortable not to require some kind of competitive listing of prices and go straight to 25,000. Like I say, we have never been written up for that with our practices, so something to think about. Mr. Estes had to, I'm sure, order stuff all the time. You dealt with this. Did you find very often you could buy it cheaper than was on the bid?
Several times. Even the supplies for your classroom, you can buy them at Walmart or the local store cheaper than you get it on bid.
And you didn't feel like it infringed on your time as a principal?
Not if you can save money.
Well, we have 2 bookkeepers in our high schools now. Every school does have a designated bookkeeper, and teachers or any person has to submit first a requisition. So the principal is going to sign off on that requisition before the order is placed. That would be an audit finding. If you purchased before you requisitioned the dates and all, it's an audit finding. Mr. Tollett's a principal down there. He could probably relate to you what we're talking about. What do you see, sir?
Yes, many times the coach comes, you're going to buy new uniforms, and then you just simply, you sign the requisition, and then you get the bid. And in that way, you know that you're getting a good bid, and besides the fact, it's not really that big of a deal, because they make a call, and they say we need 15 basketball uniforms, whatever the case may be, and then they fax them a bid, and then that goes to the form, and then you list the forms, and that way it's kind of proof. And it helps me, because it's not like, you don't have to worry that they're using one person and they're overspending, they're not, not doing the due diligence as a good steward of money. So it doesn't, it's not that big of a,
Want you to understand
big of a deal. That helps, I mean.
Yes, definitely, thank you.
Other questions, Ms. Bush? You all done with that one? You are, aren't you? Yes. Need a motion to approve? Good?
So moved.
Blair, thank you. A second? Who was it? Okay. All right. A second from 3 or 4 or more people.
Math on the same page.
Any further comments and discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ms. Bush?
Thank you. We had a request for policy 5.802 to be amended to delete its preference for a doctorate degree under qualifications. Under the original, that would fall under line 4 on page 1. And this is to reflect the Director of Schools brochure for the director position search as discussed during the last board meeting.
So what's the reasoning for taking it out? I did not attend the last board meeting, so I don't know that.
The reason we had it, and I requested Ms. Bush put this on the agenda, because what we had was put out pamphlet that basically has got the qualifications on it. And this basically was on the previous one. Now, myself, and I'm sure some of the other board members were in the same way, as far as you don't have, the last 3 directors we've had on here hadn't had a doctorate to do it. So just to alleviate any confusion, we talked about taking that out of it. Well, you can't take it out of it because it's in the policy here. So the reason I brought it up, when this comes up again, next director or whatever down the road, if the board wants to add it in their flyer or whatever, they can do it. If not, they don't have to worry about it. That's the whole reason.
And I think the other thing that we talked about, we did not want to discourage a high-quality candidate who might read that as a discriminatory attitude towards someone who did not have a doctorate. And as Mr. Hodge said, our last 3 very successful directors of schools all have not had doctorates, but they've been very successful in leading our district. So I think that was part of the conversation too. We just didn't want to discourage someone who might want to apply.
Is it not on the brochure that he sent us, the new one?
It is on the brochure.
Yeah.
It is, because it's got to be on there.
It's in the policy.
Because
This is taking care of a future issue.
I would voice my opinion as a board member very much in favor of the preference for a doctorate degree. It reflects the fact that we value higher levels of degrees, which is also reflected in our policy in human resources, where we reward those advanced degrees in the classroom with higher pay. It's part of our pay structure. I don't think that this has been a deterrent in any way toward any candidate applying for or the board considering. And I think the evidence of that is exactly what we have seen. As you point out that our last 3 directors have not had this doctorate, I think the board is quite capable of considering the qualifications. There are countless numbers of people who refer to Mr. Odom as Dr. Odom. I hear it all the time, and it is an expectation of the community that we would have a preference for a highly qualified individual in that role as director of schools. Oftentimes, our principals have doctorates, and we reward those with higher levels of pay. If we're going to eliminate a preference for the doctorate degree, then I would ask the question, are we also going to eliminate preferential pay for advanced degrees among the rest of our faculty? That's a reasonable conclusion from a position that says that we no longer value it enough to make it a preference in the director of schools.
Mr. Hall, I'm just going to tell you, I disagree with your last comment. If they do have a doctorate, they're being compensated for it. You agree?
Yes, and they're being compensated for it because we value it.
They're doing what now?
They're being compensated for an advanced degree, be it a master's or a doctorate, because we value that.
I agree.
Okay? If we value it, then it should be reflected in our policy that we have a preference for that doctorate degree. We value it.
I disagree with you. I'm trying to keep the next board to where if they want to do it, if they want to add it in there, they can put it in there.
No previous board has been restricted, and our board is not restricted from considering candidates that have or do not have a doctorate degree.
I think my feeling the other night when we discussed this was I feared that someone away from Rutherford County, I see our last 3 candidates who were all excellent, including Mr. Odom, knew already. But if someone were off somewhere and were qualified and going to be considered, and if I were reading that right there, I would say to myself, reading between the lines, perhaps they really want a doctorate degree, when clearly that's really not true, because our last 3 directors haven't had one. Now, the issue of paying a doctor more for being a principal and not hiring a doctor for director of schools, I disagree with you, Mr. Holliday. I don't think those are related in any way. I think that just confuses and complicates the situation. But, as I said the other night, and it doesn't really bother me all that much, but since we're going to vote on it, I think I'm going to favor taking it out of there. But it does not apply this time, does it? No. It can't, because it's already on there. So perhaps the argument is moot.
So you're saying the brochures that are going out already have that on there for whoever replaces? Right,
because we've already approved the brochure. As far as I know, it's published.
Okay.
It's online, at least.
It is, and we don't take it out because it's policy right now.
Right. Now, and I don't see how we can revise that. I mean, it's too late for that. He's already started. But when they call, a candidate might call from, say, Kentucky and talk to Mr. Bennett, all right, they may ask him about that right there, and he can say, it's exactly like it reads. Their last 3 directors have not had a doctorate degree, and leave it at that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to weigh in, if I may, and kind of looking at this, too, from a perspective of almost 30 years of recruiting, and some of that recruiting being for very high-level positions, including searching for CEOs of corporations. I guess first I'd kind of like to say I think this is really, to kind of coin a phrase, much ado about nothing, to be honest with you. First of all, I don't see, this is in so many job descriptions where the employer will say, you know, bachelor's degree required, master's highly desirable, or whatever the language might be. Same thing sometimes with the doctorate degree for those types of positions. I don't see, based on my experience, that it has ever deterred a good applicant from applying if it doesn't say that it's specifically that it's a requirement. But the more I thought about this is, too, that with the wording, and sometimes it does boil down to a real semantics game, with saying preference, I could actually see it impacting negatively from another perspective, and that being, let's say we had 5 candidates. 2 of them had doctorates, 3 of them didn't. We selected one of the ones that didn't. With the way you have that worded in the policy now, I agree, it might almost come across as, are we giving one of those doctorate degree candidates the opportunity to come back and say, wait a minute, you know, you discriminated in your hiring practices because of, you know, I'm in a protected class, or whatever the case might be. But I think there might be an area of compromise here where we could actually change the wording of it. You know, it could be master's degree in education with a doctorate degree desirable. I know it's really basically the same thing, but it doesn't sound as...
Oh, you're right.
Makes sense?
That makes a real good point. And I see how somebody might say that, if I can comment on what you said, and then we can come right back to you. But if you say a preference for a doctorate degree, and you hire someone who does not have one, and 2 of the candidates did, I can see how that person could come back and say, well, you said you had a preference for a doctorate degree. You really did not. You didn't. And I think that's the point you're making, which is an excellent point.
I totally see Mr. Holloway's point of view, too. Holliday, excuse me, I said Holloway, sorry about that. But I was kind of on the fence about it, honestly, because of those things. So I think maybe if we play with the semantics of it, maybe we could compromise on that.
My point remains the same, I think, too. However you want to word it, a doctorate degree is desirable, which is a lot better than the preference, I think. I think it's a lot better. It still could sound like a person that did not know our system but had all the qualifications. It could still sound to them, but reading between the lines, that they really want me to have a doctorate degree, and I don't have one, so I'm not going to apply. And that's the opposite of what we want. Please.
Before realizing that this was on the agenda for us to consider this evening, knowing that Mr. Odom was retiring, and believing very seriously in his success, I did think, just as my husband and I were talking, that we did need to see the candidate that did have a doctorate. So because of the size of our system, the growth that we're expecting, I agree it doesn't have to be mandatory, but I would want to see us look for the best candidates. And then I thought about the position of being a director of a corporation, and all my staff have doctorates and I don't. And I do think that there is value in that. It's a board of education, so there's value in taking the time to seek higher education. We encourage it in our children. And so the perfect candidate may not have it, but I certainly would want to see us seeking out the very best. So then when I came and I saw this, I did think even before the other comments, that I wouldn't want to see that removed, because I think it's something that we should strive for. We are growing, and if we believe seriously that we're going to continue to grow the way that we are, what are other school systems that are comparable to our size? What are they looking for as they make their hiring decisions? Because we want the very best. No at all slight against those who have very successfully led us. If I could convince you to not retire, we would have no problem. We want to try that. But those are my thoughts.
Chairman Gordon, you've stated that someone from the outside could read this and think that, well, they really have a preference for a doctorate, and your statement, when in fact we do not. On what basis do we say that a doctorate is not preferred? Because I think that we've just heard from our community that there are those in our community, and I will say as a board member, it is preferred. And so I don't understand how we can say when surely in practice, preferred is applicable because the last 3 directors have not had that. We can't say that it's required because the evidence doesn't support that. But likewise, I don't think the evidence supports that it is, in fact, not a preference.
Well, personally, preference, I don't have a preference. I want to look for the leadership skills. I want to look for the background. I want that person, male or female, to ooze with integrity like Don Odom has over the years that he's served us. So that is my preference. If we were going to strike, and I'd put integrity, the preference is integrity. But as far as the doctorate, I continue to hang my hat on that. Hewlin Watson and Harry Gill and Don Odom have been extraordinary leaders, and I just didn't have a preference for a doctorate. Now, if someone does have one, I'm not going to discriminate against them because they have a doctorate. But it's all about leadership skills. It's all about having a vision and having having integrity. That's what's important to me.
The right person for the job. And thinking about the comments that were made, someone that's not familiar with our system may look at this and become discouraged and think that we really do want a doctorate. We need someone in this position, as Mr. Odom knows, that is thick-skinned, that is not going to have their feelings hurt, because you probably go home every day with your feelings hurt if you didn't develop that thick skin, right? So I think someone who is really motivated to have this position needs to be able to get past thinking, oh, well, they want a doctorate, so they're not going to be interested in me. We need someone that's going to say, you know what, I'm qualified, I may not have a doctorate, but I've got what it takes, and I'm going after it, regardless of what's on that path.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a doer. I'm not looking for a title. I'm looking for somebody that's proven themselves, that's going to come in and do the job.
Exactly.
And,
I'm not sure what the most important skill is, but I do know the one thing. Diplomacy is right up there at the top. And if you're not a diplomat, you're headed for trouble as a director of schools. And I think also, maybe this deserves to be said, but I taught school with a lot of people and served under various principals and 4 or 5 directors. And there's a lot of people, the large majority of people, I guess, that I went to school with that went on and got their master's, EDS, or plus 45 or whatever, but they could not make the sacrifice to get a doctorate degree because the requirements were so strict, mostly the requirements which meant that you had to be in residence somewhere for 6 months or so without a salary and that sort of thing. And these were family men and women and working people, and they just really, ability-wise, no problem. But otherwise, they really couldn't do it. And that's a problem that I have maybe with that. But you know what, I think I'm all right, but I don't want to leave the impression, regardless of Mr. Holliday's excellent arguments, that we leave the impression that we prefer, and I'm using the word that's here, a doctorate degree. But it may be, as someone said, I think that was Ms. Moore, it may be much ado about nothing. Maybe so.
Well, and I'm sorry, you know, Regina. Regina's points, and as I think about it too, and I guess that's one of the things that really was kind of on my mind, I just didn't articulate it, and certainly not as well as you did, so thank you for that, that it's an appearance kind of thing too. Again, when you look at, we're the 4th largest school district in the state of Tennessee, and for us to not even have it in there at all, and I agree completely, I mean, wouldn't have traded Mr. Odom in the years that he's put in for anything, for any doctorate degree. So it's not a requirement. And again, based on experience, no strong candidate that sees something that just says preference or desirable is going to keep them or hinder them from applying for this job. If they want it, they're going to do their research. They're going to find out that our last 3 directors didn't have doctorate degrees, and by George, they're going to apply for it anyway. But from an appearance standpoint, again, in striving for the best, and, you know, if we look at it and we say we have 2 strong candidates that equally on all the other things, I know that's pretty rare, but, you know, let's say we did, just hypothetically, we had 2 that were pretty much identical except for that degree, what are we going to do? I would venture to say we'll hire the doctorate. And again, it is kind of an appearance thing, but it also, when you have subordinates working for you that have higher degrees of education than you, I think there's something to be said for it. So my recommendation would be, or can I make a motion? How do we do this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and then we
I
can
would
discuss the
recommend
motion.
that we leave the doctorate degree information in there and that we just simply change the language to a master's degree in education with a doctorate degree being desirable.
Master's degree in education with a doctorate degree in education?
Yes. So the motion would be motion to change number 2 under qualifications to a master's degree in education with a doctorate degree desirable.
Correct.
Okay, you don't want to say of education.
No, you don't. That's what I want to point out.
Yeah, no. Because you may have an individual that has all that administrative and education background, for instance, that has a law degree. And I still think the fact that that higher degree is there is applicable regardless.
Okay, let me get a second here for purposes of discussion or otherwise. You're seconding, Ms. Harvey? Okay, we have a second. Mr. Estes, did you have a comment?
Yes. On all of these qualifications, what we're asking for is a professional educator's license. Then we go down there and we say 3 years administrative experience. That doesn't mean we're not going to take somebody that's got 10 years, right? These are minimum qualifications for that job. So if you just said the minimum qualification was a master's degree in education, we would still take somebody with a doctorate whether it was listed or not.
Are you making a motion to amend the motion? You want to vote on her motion first? And then...
I guess I would respond to Mr. Estes's argument with such other qualifications as the board deems desirable is a completely ambiguous statement, and so to say that these are absolute minimum qualifications I don't believe is completely accurate. I believe that these are the 4 things that as a board we choose to place into policy and hold as the highest qualifications. And just as there is a permissible discretion in item 4, such other qualifications as the board deems desirable, there is discretion in number 2 that says that the current motion, that a doctorate degree would be desirable.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have other comments? Who's got the motion written down? You got it?
Yes.
Read it again.
So the motion would be to amend number 2 under qualifications to a master's degree in education with a doctorate degree desirable.
May have to raise your hand on this one, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments? Let's try the voice vote first. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No. Well, there you go. I guess we better vote, hand vote here. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Six, is that right? All opposed, please raise your hand. Eight, all right? Confirm 8? Yes. Okay, so the motion failed. Floor is open for further discussion.
Chairman, I make a recommendation to leave it as is.
Mr. Young has made a motion to leave it as is with a preference for a doctorate degree. Is that what you're saying?
No, taking it out.
Without it being there. Okay. I need a second on that, and then we can discuss it. Mr. Hodges seconded. Okay, the motion was a master's degree in education. Right? That's it.
That's with deleting the preference for a doctorate degree.
That is correct. That is correct. Okay. Discussion.
Dr. Martin, with apologies for putting you on the spot, does your doctorate make you a more effective educator?
My experience of 18 years, I have seen leaders who are just effective with a master's degree and have the license to be an administrator to a doctorate. It's the individual person. Just like in the classroom, it's not the degree of that teacher, it's that individual teacher in the classroom.
Are you a more effective educator because of your doctoral training?
You would have to tell me how you are measuring that.
Are you viewed by your peers with additional respect because of your doctorate?
I think I've been fortunate in Rutherford County to be respected from day one, so I've always felt respected. I've never felt disrespected, so I still feel respected after my doctorate as I did before.
Mr. Holliday, if I could just interrupt just a second, and I would never, ever stop you from asking a question, okay? Ever, or any other board member, policy member. But I don't think those questions are answerable. I'm sorry, but I don't believe.
We are discounting the value that we place on higher education among our employees when we take this preference out of the job description for the director of schools.
That's your opinion.
It is my opinion.
Yep, okay.
Well,
opinions.
And
the
that we have to choose a doctor. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that we leave it in the brochure.
Yes, but we take it out of our policy.
Right.
Well, with the intent that next time around it won't be in the brochure.
Unless the board wants
Well,
to.
if the board wants it in there, they can put it in
It's the
there.
board's decision.
Well, but this board is making a decision that can also ripple through and take away, because the state has said to us that they no longer value higher education degrees, and it was left to this board to say that we would, in our differentiated pay package, we would pay higher level degrees an additional amount of money in the classroom. We made that decision, and we placed a value on a master's and a doctorate degree among our employees. Now, our chief employee, we're going to say, oh, except for you, it doesn't really matter.
If I can just add, I've been at Smyrna High School for 21 years, and recently, it just seems like we've had several people that I've worked with, both administrators and co-teachers, that have reached their doctorate, they've finished it, and I can tell you that as I have a master's degree, I'm very proud of that, and I'm through. No matter how much money you offer me, I'm not going back to school. But when I look at those fellow teachers, I mean, they are admired. There is much respect given for that degree. So when I speak to Dr. Martin, in my mind, because I know what that involves, there's a lot of admiration for that. And in addition, now that I have this doctor and this doctor and this doctor and this doctor in my building, I also expect much more, because that title carries a lot. And so for that administrator that is a doctor, I think as a school, we look to that person with different eyes and we expect more. But much respect is given for that too, because we don't call them doctor because they demand it. That's out of respect. And so it's hard to look at that in any different way. I've just become very familiar with that.
And I think to that point too, it is a perception thing. And again, I keep going back to the fact of how big we are and the impression that we have to set for the state and everyone else, that we would just arbitrarily take that out of there when we're not even saying it's a requirement, I think hurts us.
I just don't see what it hurts to leave it in there.
Well, our vote, which was 8-6, removed your wording, right? That's what that did. Now the way it reads now, Mr. Young's motion has no wording, no reference to a doctorate degree at all. And you're saying you don't like that. In case you're wondering, the floor is definitely open for discussion and clarification from anyone.
I just don't see why it hurts to leave it there. What does it hurt to have that in there?
It does not,
It does give leeway to a future board if they want to put it in the brochure, in the advertisement, or if they don't. It gives that board the choice at that time. As far as who we hire in the next few months, this really doesn't matter, but it does relieve that board of the wording, and that board can do what that board desires.
With that argument, strike the page blank and leave leeway to a future board.
Is that the motion you're making, Mr. Thomas?
I'm not making a motion, I'm making an argument against your comment.
No one said anything about it, but it doesn't. The number 2 here does not mention what a lot of our teachers, principals have, and that's an EDS. Doesn't mention that at all. Doesn't say anything about the plus 45, which I sweated blood, sweat, and tears to get. But I don't know if that means anything at all. It says a master's degree in education. Mr. Young's motion was to leave number 2 as it is, and without the reference to the doctorate degree. Is that correct? And we had a second. Who was it? Mr. Hodge?
I would say, as a point of order, Mr. Young's motion is to change the policy to eliminate with preference for a doctorate degree, which is not as it is. As it is with a doctorate degree.
As presented in this earlier, this is what came to us, struck out. That's what I'm saying we need to vote on.
I think Mr. Holliday is correct. As I understand your motion was to amend number 2 to state a master's degree in education, thereby deleting the with preference for a doctorate degree. So in the end, what number 2 would say, it would be a master's degree in education. So I think Mr. Holliday is correct in regards to his assessment of the motion.
I think we're all correct. Isn't that what I said?
Yes, but your wording is to leave it as is, and that's an incorrect statement, because as it is has the doctorate degree in there.
Okay, Mr. Holliday, whatever you say. It's crossed out on my form too, so I figured it's not there. But, okay. Are there other, yes, sir.
Just clear, I understand the motion to be then, for number 2, we'll read to amend number 2 to say a master's degree in education.
That was my motion.
Okay, I don't want to cut off comments now. Somebody's got something to say, let's get it out there. This did cause considerable discussion the other night, and it has been caused some tonight, and probably justifiably so, maybe.
I think it's worth noting that this policy committee includes members of our community for the purpose of hearing from the community, and those 2 members of the community have both said that they prefer the doctorate to be included.
They'll have a vote and are welcome to it. Okay, Ms. Bush, would you, I know we've heard it 4 or 5 times, but
Yes.
read it again, please.
The motion would be to amend number 2 under qualifications to a master's degree in education.
Okay, a motion's been properly made and seconded. I think we'll probably do it by hands again. All in favor of Mr. Young's motion, please raise your hand. Appears to be 9. Is that right? 9? Okay. All opposed, please raise your hand. Appears to be 6. Am I wrong? 5.
Oh, I'm sorry.
6. Okay. Are there anything else on this matter? If not, are we caught up? Are we in good shape?
Yes, sir. I would just add, as you stated, we have a few policies that will be presented at our next policy meeting. We anticipate having that hopefully in May, depending on our legislature. But we'll definitely be scheduling that and sending out the minutes from this meeting as well as those amendments before the meeting so that you have time to review. Those policies are going to be including attendance, graduation, and curriculum, so we'll have a number to discuss next time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me or Patricia, who I'd like to thank for being here, as well as Mr. Zago and Mr. Sandvik. Thank you for coming as well.
She does need to do it either in May or first week of June, so that any changes the legislature makes, we can get in that student handbook. That's the thing that drives it. We need to get it in writing, and she has to go to print fairly early for it to be back when school starts. So we do need to try to work that in when TSBA sends us those sample policies, you know.
Just two things for the board real quick. First of all, our next meeting, I believe, work session is the 13th of February. I believe that's correct. And I have it right here. Ms. Michaels has got a list of meeting dates and budget and special call, and it is extensive.
I think we're here every night in March, aren't we?
I beg pardon?
I think we're here every night in March, aren't we?
It is many, many nights, and of course, there's interviews in there, and the budget, and one with Health and Ed, I believe, and I don't remember all of them, but anyway, please look at that. She's going to email it to you, I believe, and please look at that, and if we're going to have changes, and boy, there's not many dates to have changes on, I can tell you that, but if we're going to have changes, then you need to let her know as soon as possible, please. Well, I really appreciate the input tonight from all of you. Thank you so very, very much. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned.